All right, I'm recording this with my AirPods, so if you're broke, I can't hear you. Um, okay, today a lot of vocab coming your way. So we're mostly just writing down some stuff about what we were doing while we were playing around on Friday. So let's start off with where we do a lot of our work for the time being. So this place is called the UV editor. That is the workspace that we organize our two-dimensional shells in from our model. So this whole process that we're working on is a method of taking your 3D model in space XYZ and breaking it down into a bunch of collections of your faces laid out flat in the two-dimensional space UV. People always ask me where does UV mapping come from? It's just I'm referring to the two-dimensional space that your model is consistent of. So all the laid out flat shells of your 3D model. Now, to create these shells, we perform what is known as a planar map. That is an action which creates a UV shell. Now, I use the word create, and that's a little bit of a misnomer, actually, because we're not actually creating anything new. We're basically redoing the already existing shell, because each face, so my definition here for shell, so the shell is just any single face or any group of selected connected faces. The vocab word for that would be contiguous, for those of you that know what that word means. So a shell is a face or selected contiguous faces from a 3D model that have been mapped into the 2D UV space. Faces are only represented by one shell in the UV space. So whenever you make a new face with extrude, it automatically has corresponding shells in the UV space. They are one. It's just the UV space is the 2D representation of the same object. So whenever you make new faces on your model, those also show up in the UV space. When we create planar maps, all we're doing is recreating their shells. We're moving them into a new shell based on the settings that we set for our planar map. That's all. Now, the last two on here, we've already talked about a little bit in the past, materials, but let's talk about the specifics between when I say a material, what I mean by a material versus a texture, because the short answer is that materials contain textures. You assign a material to an object, and that material contains your textures. So materials we use, you guys are familiar with using Lamberts or blends to color your certain things that we've worked on throughout the year. This is the first year that I've taught materials so early on in the year. So you guys are familiar with adding materials and just tweaking the little color box and changing the color there. So we are going to now be working with applying textures within the channels of our materials. So, for example, color being the obvious one, will be, texturing colors onto our objects. We'll also be creating, it says here, a texture file graphically represents information about the model's appearance. Essentially, what that is saying is that, so for things like bump maps and spec maps, this black and white information that doesn't actually graphically show up on the model, but what it does is it is read as information. So, black to white being a 0 to 100 spectrum. They use that data of where, how black, white, shade of gray to represent things like adding scratchiness to something, so how white, the difference in the contrast between the white and the black tells the renderer how scratchy the surface is. So like this. Or if it's shiny, it'll be really white in your specular texture versus if it's not shiny, it would be black, that kind of stuff. All right, so that was a lot of long-winded talking. So questions, comments, concerns out the gate. Cool. So wrapping back around, so defining the UV mapping process and its role. So UV mapping, this is the process through which we create a two-dimensional layout of the faces from our 3D object. And then those layouts are what are used to create textures for those sets of faces. Now, one of the things that probably flew by you guys, you didn't realize what the meaning of it was when we were looking at that Summoner's Rift video. On Summoner's Rift, he was using those big-ass scanned rocks, and the scanned rocks, one of the things that he touted as being really great about the rocks is that they only had 4 UV islands, as he called them. And basically what he was saying is the UV mapping was done really well, so there's only 4 seams on the object, so it's not easy for people to tell where there are seams or cuts along our 3D object for the 2D shells. Now, that is the point that I was trying to make with you guys last week, and as I brought up with my Game Design 2s when we were talking last week, which is that the industry is moving away from needing to have everything have its own set of discrete textures, making an actual texture for something. A lot of it is now moving in the procedural direction. So you just go into your game engine, and then you apply the procedurally generated PBR substances. I'm going to put old mahogany wood on this. I'm going to put fresh brass on this, and, corroded iron on this, all that stuff. So when all of those textures are procedurally generated rather than you having to make them by hand in Photoshop, the only thing that's going to matter at that point is this process. How good are your UV maps? So not to frankly dump on my 2s, but it's just like, this is the UV mapping process. Don't shortchange learning this, because every year this is the thing where it gets it's new, it's different, it's not as intuitive as, say, modeling stuff in 3D is, and people just don't give it as much due deference. This is like the big part of where the industry is shifting, where this stuff matters a lot more than it did maybe in the past. So, all right, that was long-winded. So let's talk about how we actually do UV mapping in Maya. So scroll down here. All right, so 2 methods for UV mapping. So the actual mechanics and setup of how we're doing it in Maya. So you need the UV editor to do this. So I have 2 ways you can do it. Either the classic method, which doesn't matter which one you choose. So if you just go to the UV menu here and go to UV editor, by default, I already snapped my toolkit over here, so I'm going to pull this off. So when you click on, let me close that. When you click on the UV editor, it should pop up both of these windows, the UV editor and the UV toolkit. So your tools and your workspace. Now, I suggest if you're going to use the classic method that you stick your UV toolkit on one of the sides of the editor so that they move around together and just make it easy on yourself. Because otherwise they're going to be separate and it's just not really that useful. Be careful that you don't dock things when you don't mean to, by the way, when you're moving things around the screen. So that's option number 1. Now, my twos. This is cool new stuff. So if you want another way to edit with UVs, I think I showed it to you guys last year maybe, and it was more buggy, but now it actually works. If you just go to Panels, and so I'm in my workspace, I go to Panels, there's a Saved Layouts, and then you can choose Persp UV Editor, and then it just stacks them next to each other. So that way you can have your UV space, your perspective space, and then all you need to do is if you open up the editor and take the toolkit and snap it over here with your channel box, then that way when you do this, when you go back to Saved Layouts like this, then you have 3D Space UV Editor Toolkit here. So this is the method that I'm using now, but it's either way. It's whatever you guys prefer. Nick, did you see that? So if you go to Panels and then go to Saved Layouts, and then there's Persp UV Editor, it brings up this thing where they're like nested like this, and then you can just put the toolkit over here if you want to. And then also what's great is that you can use like the multi view. You can just press spacebar and switch between the two if you want. So yeah, there's that. Click that. Cool. So those are your methods of opening up the UV editor. All right. So let me soapbox here for a second. So I know I mentioned this when we were talking about projects before break, well before we started doing the bedroom project, and I said this will come up later. This is that later, okay? So texture files. When we were doing our assignment on Friday, we had 4 texture files we were working with. We had Minecraft cubes numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, okay? Now, where do texture files go in a project? So going forward, we'll be working a lot with Maya projects, which are, again, just the little folder setups that we have where all the folders are named things very specifically so Maya knows what goes where. So, for example, your Maya files that usually live in the Maya or in the scenes folder within your Maya project. And then when you have images or textures in this case, there is a specific folder that textures go into, and that is the source images folder. So basically you can think of this, if it's going into Maya, we're sourcing from that. Okay, that's the source. So in this case, files entering Maya as textures go into source images. Files leaving Maya, so things that you do in Maya that you're exporting out. So say like a rendered still frame, or in the case of what we're doing, UV snapshots, those go into your images folder. So don't cross-pollinate between the two. If you send out a UV snapshot, which you'll understand what that means in a few days. So if you send out your snapshot and it goes in your images folder and you pull it into Photoshop, and that's all good, what you don't want to do is then connect your texture to the images folder. Don't go, assign your file node and then go click back to the images folder and select from there. That is defeating the purpose of having a Maya project. Okay, so make sure you know that. Now, steps to do the things, basically. So let's do a quick run through of what we did on Friday to create our Minecraft cubes. So let me go ahead and throw this open, grab my Minecraft cubes. All right, so we have this, and I'm going to do this the classic method for right now. Or you can also just drag the UV toolkit over here either way. Doesn't matter. Then you can just flip back and forth to it when you need it. So I have this cube here. Hasn't been UV mapped. Has no material, anything like that. This one's already been UV mapped. So you'll remember when we did the assignment, 2 of the cubes assigned already with the material. 2 of them needed to be UV mapped after we assigned the material. So let's do it how we normally would, which is to turn this on. So I'm going to switch into my face mode because I'm going to project my face on top. And I've turned on this checkered material for right now because I want you guys to see how this is going to change. So right now we can just see the 0, 0 on the material. You can see where my face is located in the middle of the texture. So steps to planar mapping, you can either use the planar button over here by shift clicking on it like we did on Friday. There's also under the UV menu, there's just the planar thing, and then you can click the options box and it'll pull it up either way. So this is on the top of my object. I know that because of the green arrow, also because I have eyes. So then I'm going to project this from the y-axis, and I'll just hit apply because I'm going to do this multiple times, or at least normally I would. And you'll see now, if I go ahead and undo that, so this is where the face was on the UV map previously. Then I hit apply, and it gets reprojected to the full size of the UV shell. And so now I can see the full texture on it. And then, so let's do this again. I can select down here, hit apply. And you can see that this updated down here. Okay? Now, let's do the materials thing first. So, let me read these. Let me read these for the notes. So, what we just did, we selected our faces. Then, we popped open UV planar options. All you need to do is pick the right axis. So, you have a 1 in 3 shot of guessing it right. Basically, you'll know if the checkerboard comes out looking good or whatever texture you have assigned to it comes out looking proper, that you did it right. So in the case of my checkered grid, I can see nice big checkered grid box. Now let's assign some materials to our object and then assign some textures to our materials. So I got this one here. I'm going to switch into object mode. Let's right click. I'm going to go down to assign favorite and choose Lambert. And again, I want to remind you guys, when you do this, make sure you select it and then right-click high up in the workspace, just because this window goes down so long, or this menu here, and it can go behind the dock. So you don't want that. If I do it down here, see, it's behind the dock. So then I added a material. I don't see it here, so I'm just going to right-click my arrow, Lambert 8, cool, that's it. Click on this and add a file. And then I'm going to click on the little folder here, connect my texture, and open. And so if textures don't show by default, it is 6. So just 6 to display my textures. And you can see the faces that I projected. They turned out fine. And then I got to figure out how to make it not look like garbage in here. It should be crisp edges or crisp lines. But you can see these faces that haven't been projected, the texture still looks like Garbo on it. All right. So what we just did, assigning a material. So you guys are well familiar with that from earlier in the year. Right click or select the object or the faces that you want to assign a material to. Then you just right click and hold, go down to choose a favorite. Usually you're going to get a Lambert or a Blinn. Then, so the new stuff, assigning textures to that material. So what is it that we're adding? Typically with a lot of the stuff that we're doing it just with the color channel or the diffuse channel. So in the attribute editor, click that checkered box in the right channel. Then choose file from the menu that pops up. It's asking you what you're connecting to that channel. File is fourth from the top in the little menu that pops up. Then when the file node opens up in the attribute editor, you just click the folder, find your image, hopefully already in that source images folder because it's looking in your currently selected project source images folder. And then when you hit open, if it doesn't show it, press 6 to activate textures. Questions, comments, or concerns? Very good. Cool. I'm going to stop the video and let you guys copy this in. When you're done, just go ahead and hit that turning button.